All right, we are live. Enterprise Month in Review. I have my usual co-pilot. Sorry for the buzzword there, Brian Summer. What up?
Would be the Haps, John. I didn't know I'd been relegated to co-pilot, but it is a promotion. I used to be the flight engineer, and before that, I was the gun turret pilot, gun turret operator. So anyway,
Yeah, this one was exciting too. It was like running down the tarmac with that takeout from the from Chick-fil-A's or whatever. It's pretty
oh
exciting. Right
yeah,
before go live. All right, this is great.
mm.
Here we are. Hey folks, please chime in the chat so I know that everything is streaming on LinkedIn. If you have any trouble on LinkedIn, we have a YouTube link I can pop you, but hopefully LinkedIn is working well. And yeah, we were off on the road for a little bit, Brian, so we lost our usual monthly rhythm, but this is still the month in review, and we got a special guest, Hyoun Park, who earned his way onto the show with a really meaty blog post on FinOps. So I'm looking forward to that discussion. But that means we only have a handful of minutes to bring everyone up to speed on all the things that we learned on Tarmax this fall.
I know that I've seen plenty of Vegas, and I'll be going back there. It looks like in the end of September for Acumatica. I don't know if you're going to be
January, I
there.
think you mean. Yep,
Into
yep.
January, excuse me.
January,
Yeah,
yep, yep.
and then I got to be somewhere else first week of February, I think in Austin, and I got another invitation to be in Atlanta also in late January. So the travel schedule's filling up again. So
Always
um,
does, doesn't it?
mhm. Well, we
All
saw some
right.
interesting things this year, John, and I don't want us to necessarily recap all those because today we always follow this kind of an agenda.
Indeed.
So we'll start it off as usual with what today's cringy buzzword's going to be, and then we'll jump into each of our underrated enterprise stories. A hint: John actually flagged one of the same stories, and there's our new buzzword of the day: Fo-
What the hell is productivity?
productivity. Well, I saw that it was talking about how there are people who kind of remind you in not Doonesbury, in Dilbert. Do you remember there was Wally who walked around all the time with a coffee mug, sitting in on meetings that he wasn't even invited to? He always
Yeah,
looked productive, but he never really did anything. And apparently, productivity is a real problem out there in the workforce with people who are not putting in the effort, but definitely showing up in the office and looking busy. So that's a
I
new one to add to
see.
the new one to add to the dictionary or thesaurus. Anyway,
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine who was in like a very long um, staff meeting, and I suggested that he would have like a B-roll footage of himself like moving around and like responding, with facial expressions to things people were saying on video. So that would be a great productivity little Zoom B-roll action.
it'd be even better if you could add it to like on the chat stream instead of having those little emojis or those clapping hands floating up. If you actually had those little, video bites to go with it. I can do a pretty wicked eye roll. Apparently, that's something someone from Forrester told me at an analyst meeting a few weeks ago. But anyway,
Hello, LinkedIn user. Yes, comments are welcome here. In fact, I was wondering if the LinkedIn stream was working, so you are the first one in. So please chime in because you are part of the show. And Brent is requesting Dr. Pepper.
hmm.
Brian he
And
usually doesn't share his Dr. Pepper, Brent's, just so you know. So
that's there. And tell Brent that just in case, I actually have a pure sugar version of Dr. Pepper waiting right here on the desk, just in case we run into a problem.
all right.
John, John's always under opinionated, or that was Dennis Howlett, and I'm always over caffeinated. So anyway, we're good to go.
Wait, I'm under opinionated. Wow. All right. Here we go. Top stories. My top pick, well, one of the two was there were a bunch of stuff going on around Copilot. There was there was a Business Insider article as well. Um, we are building the plane as we fly it. Nothing else matters. They want a co-pilot tie-in for everything. So I think this is interesting because, well, for a couple reasons. First of all, outside of like a core sort of enterprise software focus, there's sort of what you might call big AI, and big AI is under the investor microscope, and that has a lot of implications. So, Microsoft is, it's not necessarily that Copilot is like a bad product or anything like that. It's the amount of money that Microsoft is sinking in has investors' attention versus returns. And then when you hear stories inside of Microsoft around frustrations around the emphasis on Copilot and that sense of force fitting AI into everything. And I think what we're going to find is that some AI use cases are really good and some are not. And some quote unquote copilots are incredibly useful and some are not. When I'm messing about in a Word document, I am not wishing I had a smarter version of Clippy sitting around. So it really depends on the use case, and we shall see. I mean, I do think, for example, that when Microsoft eventually gets a decent Copilot for Excel, that it will be useful for some individuals to ask questions about the documents they're reviewing and such. So I'm not saying that Copilot's a failure, but I'm saying that there's this underlying narrative around AI that I think is going to get a lot of investor pushback, and Copilot is right in the crosshairs at the moment with a bunch of stories coming out on that. And then we have a little sunk cost fallacy. Hi, Cherie. Yes, indeed.
So I
So,
think what we're seeing here, John, in Gartner speak is we've gone from this peak of expectations. We're starting to trickle down into the trough of disillusionment before we bounce out of that and hit something that's a more nuanced kind of way that people are going to want to use it. I think you're right that some of the use cases are great and some aren't. And I think, like you said, they're trying to change a tire while the car is rolling down the road, and it's going to take a little while to figure out what's going to stick and what's not.
yeah, and by the way, folks, if you think like, oh, great, another hour of AI, actually, specifically, our guest is coming on to talk about something non-AI, so that's how he earned his way onto the show. Though I am going to ask him about AI too, but anyway, on this topic, 7 ways Gen AI can create more work than it saves. An interesting in-depth piece on CIO, but one of the reasons I selected it was because I felt like I've been writing about this concept of AI dissonance and how challenging this is for buyers. Because the exact same week that this came out, Diginomica published a piece on uh, Josh Berson's thinking around basically Berson saying that almost sort of a celebration of ROI on Gen AI in HR. Now, I happen to disagree with what Josh Berson was putting out there around ROI, and I would really question how you would calculate ROI right now when so many of the cost factors aren't established, and some of the use cases, especially in HR, are pretty, I would say, immature because of the risk profile of HR in general. But having said that, he has a position and he talks to a lot of customers, and then here's a different position, which is really questioning in some cases whether the return is there. So this is why we're here today, really, is that, Brian, what we're trying to do is to try to parse that a little bit and help folks make sense of this so that when they go back to their projects, they can talk about these things in ways that are coherent. And I think it's really difficult to do that right now because you get such drastically different perspectives, and that even includes on Diginomica at times. So anyway, I don't think this is an easy terrain to navigate, but I thought this was one of the better articles in terms of like a sober but not necessarily skeptical take, but more drawing on some of the existing lessons from customers and saying, hey, we're struggling with the business case aspect of this.
I think the business case has real challenges because we don't know. A lot of vendors haven't been very forthcoming all year long about how they're going to really price out some of the AI capabilities in their products. I mean, we get some vague generalities like, well, much of it will be free and it's part of the core product, but some things may come at an added charge. But we don't know what that is. But that just that's just the dollar, the immediate dollar and cents pricing. There's other stuff around. Well, what's the, if I got to do carbon accounting and other kinds of reporting to really get a full look at the ROI, then I got to ask, well, what data centers is this running out of? What's their emissions footprint? What's their water consumption and so forth? Because if I got to buy carbon offsets or monetize it that way, then that affects the ROI as well. Anyway, we got a lot of work to do on ROI for AI today.
Yeah, for sure. And look, some of the ROI stuff is actually good news. Like I talked to a few smaller partners in the last couple of weeks building on, inside the quote unquote ecosystem, and some of them are using much smaller models that are pretty affordable for them to build and run. So some of that porting down to smaller models is going to improve some of the ROI calculations. But the point is, it's a moving target. I think that's
Right.
that's the real takeaway here. Brent, you say that Copilot may be the thing that makes privacy more important to users. That would be an accomplishment of sorts. I don't know about Copilot in general, but I know that if you didn't feel a little creepy reading about Microsoft recall and how Microsoft was going to put something on your computer that basically recorded all of your keystrokes, yeah, that's all of them. Even the keystrokes that you were using to read about, I don't know, your World Wrestling Federation Fantasy League or something, and going into your AI, yeah, that's an awkward moment. Of course, that was tabled for now, but I think that hunger for data is kind of the crossroads between like the kind of AI that's going to be helpful and the kind of AI that's going to feel more like surveillance. And so maybe that will lead to a better privacy discussion. If so, I look forward to having it with you on one of your shows. And underrated story, I just want to breeze through this, Brian, because we want to get to yours. But I thought it was cool that Spotify came out with some work from Anywhere stats around their successes with lower attrition and increased diversity, which is kind of no duh. But with so many companies kind of doing this forced March return to office and taking flack from users, it was cool to see a company that is sticking to their guns around work from anywhere, and it opens up an interesting discussion on what's working for them. And they admitted they have challenges with certain aspects of it, but I like seeing a major company use this as a competitive advantage.
Pinterest, their I think head of HR did a really good assessment of that. I tweeted about that earlier this week. Came to the same conclusion that they're going to continue with a lot of their work from home kind of stuff, not return to office. But anyway,
Indeed,
I,
on
a
to
lot of
you.
those stories. All right, so this article just blew me away. So we're talking about Southwest Airlines, someone that John and I spend lots of time
Oh
with.
yeah.
And Southwest, somebody decided to answer the question why they don't fly to Canada. And if you read this little sound bite or whatever quote I pulled out of the story, it's because they can't process a transaction in Canadian dollars. Now, I about fell out of my chair when I read that. That Southwest Systems can't handle a different currency, and I'm like, wow. Every financial accounting system since about the late 80s, early 90s has been able to handle multiple currencies, multi-currency accounting, and all kinds of banks can handle transactions across borders. And then you get an entity as big as Southwest that can't handle it. It was so like, folks, every time when you think we've solved certain problems and like wiped them out, we'll never see it again. It's like some disease like the plague that pops back up every, decade or so somewhere in some corner of the world. And this one, a major, major company can't handle foreign currency. That just blew me away. And by the way,
I thought AI could fix that, Brian. I'm so confused.
but I'm waiting for but if Southwest needs to talk to somebody who knows how to put one of those kind of systems in, give me a call. You saw my LinkedIn handle at Brian S. Summer. I'll be happy to talk to you about what you need for that. Second story. This was a real sad tearjerker kind of story, first person piece. This woman wrote about how she quit teaching at the college level. She taught a course for grad students to figure out how to do a great job of writing their thesis and, for their PhD papers. And she just finally gave up. because she was reading and correcting these things. Her whole course is to teach them how to freaking write. And what did they do? They instead would feed their thing into Chat GPT, and this professor, she was just talking about how it was so frustrating. She was basically correcting Chat GPT generated papers, theses, and I'm like, wow, this is a real challenge here. And anyway, I, this shows how if you give people crutches, that they can fall back on, if they use them enough, they don't ever actually learn a good skill. Same thing.
And I was just going to say, we're going to stop the show now and watch Idiocracy for the rest of the hour. Hope you guys enjoy. I read, Brian, I read about one professor. I think there's some interesting creative things. Like I read one professor who challenged their students to actually submit essays using Chat GPT, but then to find the mistakes in it. But I can totally see how a teacher would just throw their hands up at this point. But anyway, we shall see. We're basically screwed, right?
Yeah.
Shall we see your next slide here? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, you and I both spotted this story. Why it matters that Google AI's Gemini chatbot made death threats to a grad student. Here's the relevant content on the in the middle of the screen here. That's a tough story. I mean, it makes you, anytime people, I think, get lulled into thinking, well, they've got to have fixed AI now to quit hallucinating and cursing and having Tourette syndrome problems, everything else. Then you get another story like this pops up in the news to remind you, nope, this problem has not gone away. It's not finished. It's not solved. And back to an earlier comment you made at the beginning of the deal where you talk about the value of a smaller LLM set. I think that's absolutely critical to getting some of this stuff out. If you use more generalized, big, large language models, there's just too many mathematical opportunities for horrible things like this to keep popping up. Limit the size of the LLM, and it's probably going to stay a lot more focused. But that doesn't mean it won't overrun its boundaries nonetheless.
It might at times. I've seen a couple of encouraging examples on the road of demos of smaller models that they were able to pretty much force to pull from the so-called context window. In other words, from the enterprise data and not freelance like this. But I'm still investigating the degree to which you can do that 100% of the time. But I would say that if an enterprise LLM had this kind of a problem, that would actually be bad design and bad usage of an LLM. Like if you had this kind of extreme. But it is interesting because it shows you that these big models, in particular, that are trying to be incredibly versatile for consumers, are deeply flawed. And the LLM can choose at any point to refuse the context window and basically sorts its own answer. And check out the answer. The answer was pretty problematic. So, Brian, you're absolutely right. This is a major flag for anyone who's like thinking, oh, this is like some foolproof technology. So, we got Sam's comment on airlines. The problem with airlines might not be ERP systems. The problem could be reservation systems such as Sabre, which are just irreplaceable.
Well, Sam, I'm not saying it is an ERP problem. I'm saying that the ERP vendors nailed this 30 years ago. The fact that if it's still in the old reservation systems or some of those carriers I've actually been to, if it's still in the old 80 column punch card kind of formatted record problems and the systems that work with that, yeah, that's an issue. But whether you're a passenger or a shareholder, I'm sorry, this is a technical debt challenge that a airline should have dealt with a long time ago.
Indeed. And with that, Brian, you know how you become a guest on our show? Well, one really good way is to write a really meaty, interesting blog that is not about AI, and that's what our guest has done. Hyoun Park, welcome to the show. Thanks for writing something that was not about AI that we could talk about. You are on mute, but thank you for doing that. Let me see if I can unmute you there. Oh, yeah, there. Let's see.
No, that's
me. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah.
I can talk a lot about AI as well. My company is literally named AI, but
yes.
But yeah, I spent some time thinking about some of the IT cost problems that are out there as well. I'm going to warn you in advance, we are having massive rain here in the Bay Area right now. The
Oh yeah, you got weather.
So I might be coming in and out of the feed at times.
Well, thanks for joining us.
Have no worries. If you do fade out, we'll just make up stuff and say you said it. So don't worry about it.
We'll just use your Amalgam GPT and just keep right on going.
Yeah, I'll just hold up your article and we'll go from there. Yeah.
So yeah, we do. We actually do have a graphic. We have a graphic of your article. So let's show that off. Yep, and we've even got the slides, so we can review that slide in a little bit. But this all stems from some deeper research that you've done on IT FinOps, and so what I'd love for you to do is kind of start by sort of defining a little bit what that means and also why we should care, and then we'll get into your arguments a bit. So, why should we care about this topic? Yes. Why does it matter?
So, as prosaic as it is, one of the tenets of the research I do is what I call the IT rule of 30, saying that every unmanaged IT
and
I think there you go.
Typically has about 30% in waste, and this gets shown over. So based on that, we're going to look at when you look at cloud, when you look at telecom, when you look at network, when you look at computing, a lot of this 30% waste, storage, and cloud is no exception. And one of the things that has come up over the last couple of years is this concept of FinOps, which doesn't mean financial operations, but specifically financial operations for cloud cost management, because the cloud people love taking words and turning them into other words. But so this really matters right now from an AI perspective, because AI, of course, uses a lot of compute and storage and resources as from a management perspective, and those costs got out of control, as well as the rest of cloud computing. Those costs get out of control as well. It's easy to set up new instances, set up new servers, and then simply forget about them after you're done with the testing process. It's easy for testing to get out of control without really keeping track of where your costs are throughout the day, the week, the month, and then just completely go over budget in what you're trying to do. And so there are a lot of different tools right now to try to manage those cloud costs, but they're not all working the same way. Some are very focused on optimization at a usage level. Some are focused on helping you choose the right product within a specific hyperscaler, Amazon, Microsoft, Google. Some of them help you do that apples to apples comparison. Some of them just help you optimize within your database or in your Databricks or Snowflake instance. So all these different tools are doing all these different things for cloud costs. And they're right now just kind of lumped into what we're calling FinOps. And each one of these has its strengths and weaknesses. But one of the biggest challenges is that you've got IT organizations that are only using one of these niche solutions and thinking that they've solved the problem.
Well, are we solving an economic problem, or are we solving a technical problem? Because it seems like some companies have created an environment that maybe is got too many choices, too many opportunities. And but I would agree with you that the biggest problem is that no one knows how to plan, forecast, or anticipate what their costs are going to be. I feel sorry for like a CIO, for example, trying to know what they're going to get nailed with, and some of the newer kinds of tools, or software products, have all these unknown costs. And John and I were just talking about this on AI. We have no idea what these things are going to cost, and we have no idea what the other sustainability costs are going to come along with this stuff, what they're going to be. So without transparency, you're kind of screwed from a business perspective. We had a momentary deal where you blanked out there, Hyoun.
Yeah,
Sorry.
we've had a couple of short freezes, but you're mostly holding up, so I think we're going to be okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. So there's kind of these three different categories that I think of. One is around optimization. We IT people love to optimize. So a lot of times you'll see a lot of focus on usage optimization and being able to look at peak instances versus non-peak and do all of the arbitrage that you can do to find the lowest possible cost for a bit or a byte at a specific time or place. And that's one piece of the puzzle. And that's where a lot of FinOps is focused on right now because it's fun. You get to use math. You get to calculate all of your, most optimized instances in ways that speak to the IT person. But these other two areas speak to what Brian was talking about, visibility, which are less well known. And so a second area where FinOps can fit in, but fewer solutions do, is around trend management and being able to actually figure out which variances matter more from a calendar perspective, from a business perspective, from a product perspective, and being able to actually categorize the stuff from a business definition. And then there's a third piece that we take for granted in more of the finance and ERP world around planning, budgeting, forecasting, and actually thinking about what you'd want this to look like for next year, which is done very poorly at this point. So one of the things that happens a lot in FinOps right now is called tagging, where you will literally tag each resource with your definitions or your keywords that are associated with that resource. But there's not really a good way to align that to standard business terminology. So stuff like the GL and all of the categories that we have had in ERP forever, your cost center, your profit center, your GL, things, all these things, like they are not put in by default into FinOps. So you've got this intermediate mishmash of metadata right now that is defining all of your IT resources. And right now, everybody's trying to figure out how to turn that mishmash into the business definitions that we've had for 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, so you're talking about there's a problem with the chart of accounts in the financial accounting system. There's almost like a data warehouse that's powering the analytics behind some of the FinOps stuff. The two don't necessarily share the same data model or data dictionary. And therefore, whenever you try and do the reporting, you've got all the usual problems with data accuracy, data latency, granularity differences, and all that kind of stuff. And I suspect a lot of CIOs really struggle with. They get highly annualized, highly aggregated, highly averaged kind of data from vendors. They just get this bill that shows up maybe once a quarter, once a year, or whatever, and they're trying to figure out, well, what do I do with this? What department do I charge it back to? Or how much of it can I charge back? Again, well, let me push it forward. If we look at one of my clients figured something out this time last year at the Ceridian conference. Were you there last week as well? Or
I wasn't there.
Okay. Well, they figured something out then, which was we need to quit buying all these best of breed cloud HR technologies, because not only is the administration and management of all of that different kind of software just a headache and a half, to your point, but they also realize that to get any value out of artificial intelligence tools on an economical basis, they need to get everything down as much as possible to one master set of data with one consistent set of meanings and so forth. So where are you seeing any discussion in the FinOps world where people are talking about, let's scrub out some of this best of breed stuff, and are we looking at a new age of people looking at more larger suites?
I think that from a FinOps perspective, the bigger challenge tends to be around creating duplicate instances of very large environments, because you're trying to test for various different things and create all sorts of different models. But there is also this problem of integration, that we've been throwing crap into data lakes for the past decade plus. And that can also lead to massive data growth over time, because it's not obviously a very bad process. We have kind of gave up on the idea of a golden record of truth for a while because we were so focused on trying to turn data exhaust into some sort of guiding light. And it turns out that a lot of crap is actually just crap. But having that crap and not having great retention or governance leads to simply having those ongoing costs or year over year if you don't clean up that data. So that's an issue from the cost side as well. I realize there are other business issues associated with data, but I'm just thinking about the cost side right now.
So yeah, and I want to ask you about that in the context of AI, because do you think that so-called AI tooling can alleviate some of what you're describing around this sort of data lake, throw it and hope for the best imperative? Because my first sort of gut reaction is that it can't, but maybe I'm wrong.
I think there's room to do some optimization, definitely, and rules-based or kind of policy-based cleanups of the data that could make the data more optimization. I don't think we've really figured out how to do that well yet, though, because we're still trying to figure out how much we can trust AI, well, especially generative AI, and more policy-based or kind of these fluffy qualitative judgment-based policies that we've been creating and using as prompts.
Right.
It would be great to be able to have a better idea of how those directly translate into data cleansing and data quality and workflow management and optimization type practices. But I think another challenge there is that these models are changing so quickly that you don't really know what a prompt is going to do for you from month to month or even week to week. These models get changed quickly.
Right.
The logic gets changed. And we're still experimenting with how to create our own custom prompts, which lead to that issue as well. How do we get back to AI? We were doing so well talking about prompts.
I know we made it for a period of time there, and it was my fault too. Hey, there's a paragraph in your piece that I thought was really powerful, and I think it applies both to your piece, but in general to our industry, because one of the things, I don't know about you guys, but that been struggling with all year is hearing vendors deliver what they think is differentiating messaging around a topic that turns out to not really be differentiating at all. And how do we move past that without vendors getting their feelings hurt so badly that we can't even have a conversation? And you wrote a paragraph about that I'm going to read now. This is about IT FinOps, but you could apply this, I think, this type of attitude to a lot of things. Let's just define what is not considered differentiated in 2024. Simply ingesting bills is not good enough. Being quote-unquote customer-centric and having attention to detail are considered table stakes. If you cannot provide customers that vouch for your approach being quantitatively better than other competitors. Everybody I cover can support tagging, and then you go on to talk about these other things. And if you haven't chosen a high-performance analytics solution, you're probably behind for supporting real-time changes. I thought that was really powerful, and I think probably one of your big challenges around all of this is getting that across and then helping buyers to understand what's fluff and what's not. To me, this feels like the core struggle right now.
Yeah, and we all hear this. At least all three of us here right now hear this all the time about how we provide visibility. Our customers love us. Nobody's ever done it the way we've done it before. For us, this is just something we hear 10 times a week from every vendor under the sun. And I think this is a disservice to the technology world in general, because vendors aren't pushing themselves to really say what they're doing that's different. And honestly, once I dig into a vendor's offerings, usually I can find something that's different. But when the vendor themselves can't tell you what they're doing that's different, that's a problem.
So let me jump back in, guys. First of all, am I frozen? Because you guys are on my screen, and I may have to log off and log back in.
You are good, Brian. You are moving with fluidity. So,
well, all right. So I wanted to just amplify a point you were talking a minute ago, Hyoun, about missing integrations or integrations and reports and data warehouses and the like. one of the things I'm noticing is when I help companies on a strategic planning effort, that the first thing I do is nowadays is I take an inventory of all the missing or screwed up integrations because those have huge added costs that come with it. I'm also looking at all the reports and what's missing and how many things. I still run into spots, software packages on the shelf. These are applications that somebody bought, never put in. All of these kind of things impact the economics of what's going on from not just at the data center level, but all the way through to the end users. And I was just curious if you have a modern kind of perspective on this. Are what's the conversation like in your circles on those kind of points?
It's interesting that I think that there's multiple sets of integrations right now. There's kind of the standard application integration world where you've got, the Informaticas of the world or the Workadas of the world,
Mhm.
SnapLogic, whatever, who are helping with those direct integrations. And I would say, probably the top couple hundred enterprise applications tend to be covered okay at this point if you are either doing that or working with an SAP or Oracle that will help you with those top level of integrations. The problem is that the average company and average large enterprise at this point is using over 1,000 apps. And those other 800 are either left off as silos or they're brought in via some sort of REST APIs. And there isn't a great set of ways to deal with the orchestration of APIs or the oncoming agents, the agentic AI stuff that is starting to come in as well. It's hard to figure out exactly what is coming from what and to handle data lineage across that from end to end. So there's these different levels of challenge that are happening right now. And I feel like the API and agent side really need a lot of work. While there's this core IT, which is becoming, less and less important to the entire organization as a whole. Still important, but with lowering amount of importance than it used to have. That is, so that's kind of a problem. You've got to deal with core versus this expanded long tail that is getting more complex with the rise of AI.
So, what about the intersection set between what you're writing about and the old software asset maintenance or software application management, where people were trying to keep track of usage, and are we getting in trouble from an audit perspective, or do we have a vulnerability to use an old school term here, to indirect access or other kinds of per transaction kind of charges?
That license management world, the software asset management, SAM, is definitely a piece of the puzzle of what I consider to be part of the bigger picture of IT FinOps. And with on-prem, the biggest problem tended to be that your vendor would audit you and then stick you with an extra X million dollars based on what you ended up using versus what you thought you were using, and your ability to reallocate or not reallocate licenses, things like that. Interestingly, with that's the on-prem side. SaaS has the opposite problem in that you have all these extra licenses, and normally you end up trying to it's like the reverse problem in that you are trying to actually cut costs. You're trying to find your duplicates, and you can remove them at any time because it's SaaS, but you have to know that those licenses were even created. And it can be a big problem because, for instance, when you look at your Microsoft 365 bill, often it'll say just something like 1,500 licenses. It's like, great. Who has those? I don't know, because my bill literally just says 1,500 and just stops there. And then they'll give you like a million lines of usage data that tell you all sorts of other things that you don't care about, but you can't even tell who has what without personally doing a lot of this tracking yourself. So that happens on the SaaS side. And then there's kind of related problems with cloud computing as well, where you've got to where you just know you have all these resources. You don't know what they're aligned to. You don't know what you're using them for, because you just have this one line item that says 187,000 of this, and then you've got to figure out the mess.
So I'm a buy side advocate for clients, and I'll represent them a lot of times in software negotiations. And some things I do, I know, just irritate vendors to no end. But I don't like things like embedded URLs and contracts. I tell them we won't accept them. I want very clear. I give them a schedule. I want them to map out the cost over the next 8 to 10 years based on some assumptions that I give them. I try and even get them to accept the client's paper, not their own. I rarely can win that argument, but anyway, bear with me. My point being, I'm not sure that vendors have constructed, for the most part, a contracting environment that is transparent, understandable, or even makes common sense or even good business sense from time to time. You can't do some of the things you're talking about because people just can't understand why do a 20-person company need an 1,100 page contract from like Microsoft? I don't get it.
Yeah.
I see why people like solutions like Zoho, where it's so many dollars per month per user, period. I mean, you can't say you didn't understand what that, what the terms of that were going to be. And I'm wondering, have the vendors just basically created all this extra work for legions of people like you, for software companies to create solutions to make sense of a vendor-induced insanity that's out there in the marketplace? It should not be this difficult to give vendors money. I guess that's where I'm going.
Come on, man. Hyoun's trying to make some money here too, Brian.
Right, that's job security right there.
Come on. Exactly. That's
well, he can join me on the dark side of the force and fight the good fight here.
But it is interesting how that value proposition has changed. I know that when I was getting my MBA back in the 2000s, and we talked about B2B pricing, it was about extracting value in that Jack Welch kind of way. Basically, jack up the price to the point where the client is not happy, not sad, just kind of flat somewhere in the middle, and dealing with that. But honestly, the world has changed, and I think the value exchange has to be seen as a little bit more equitable and easier at the end of the day. And I've actually seen that in the FinOps solutions that I've covered, where 10 years ago, they were all about charging as a percentage of spend. So if you were managing $1 million of spend, you might spend 2%, 20% on that solution. But it's increasingly gone to either license-based or flat fee-based pricing, because it's just too hard to keep up with that. And because cloud has grown so quickly. If you have a $100 million bill, you're not going to pay $2 million just for this software solution that did the same thing that it was doing when you were paying $20,000 for it.
Yeah, and I think I would agree that the value proposition in our industry overall is better and that cloud has something to do with it. But I would also kind of agree with the general tenor of this discussion that the pitfalls are still there and that the room for improvement is still drastic. In fact, it was only a few weeks ago I was at an event where there was, I'll call out McKinsey on this one. There was a McKinsey analyst supposedly dispensing guru level wisdom to the crowd at lunch, who said one of the big trends for the year is getting B2B customers to eat more costs. And I just sat there kind of dumbfounded, but I did respect the sort of blatant sort of strip mining attitude that was being put out there. But my immediate thought was like, why not figure out how to give them more value and how to reduce your costs? Like maybe that's your job. And if AI is so great, by the way, maybe AI should be helping you to do that so that you don't have to get your customers to quote unquote eat costs. Wow. So my point being that attitude hasn't gone away.
So let me piggyback on that, John. I run with a rough crowd of litigators in the software world, and they're always sending me copies of filings and so forth to see what I think about some of this stuff. And I got one this week, and it was some of the most egregious wallet grabbing I've ever seen by a software company. And this is one of those companies that just owns some really antiquated assets and is just jacking up fees and finding any excuse they can trying to wallet frack a customer. So, yeah, that attitude is definitely out there and prevalent. And frankly, I think if I had the economic power and muscle of a company like Walmart, let's say, behind me, I'd basically point out to vendors, this is the way we're going to do business. This is how it's going to be done. And don't come at me with any of these like URL based contracts that no one can understand. If it takes a PhD in English lit and advanced heuristics to understand your contract, you don't know what your business is all about. And you definitely don't want my business if you're that tone deaf in the way you want to interact with customers. I mean, I'm sorry. I just feel like the industry made a problem and we're trying to find a technology to solve a self-induced problem.
Yes, Brent, he said frack, which is absolutely rated PG and totally acceptable in our chat. And just catching up on a couple comments, Greg, I'm glad the stream has been better because LinkedIn has had some choppy streams in the last couple months. We've been complaining about it. Guys, just want to field this Sam Gupta comment, or the other side could be companies like HubSpot, which could feel like checking out a 100K contract on Amazon does not sit very well with CFOs. Any comment on that?
Well, I've still got the frozen screen, so I have no idea what the comments are. I'm totally flying blind. So,
well, I just read it to you, Brian.
Well, yeah, I understand. I have no comment on the HubSpot deal.
Okay.
I'm not close to that one at all. So sorry about that.
As Shiri says, clearly we need a vendor to provide an AI to interpret complicated contracts. Yeah, well, it's made in
It is
jest.
something that generative AI actually gets used to do to try to figure out the net of contracts. So my brother Leonard, who I hype up every time I can, he actually works in legal tech. He's a product manager working on using generative AI to figure out how to go through these 1,000-page contracts and lawsuits and patent filings and trademarks, et cetera, to figure out what's the meat and what isn't. And he happens to be a lawyer, and now he's going to end up taking a bunch of legal work away from lawyers.
Yeah, which brings me back to AI for a moment, if you all can indulge the AI topic, because in June of 2023, Hyoun, you wrote, I thought, one of the sort of seminal posts, Instant Mediocrity, a business guide to ChatGPT. And I thought that instant mediocrity phrase was really important and powerful, and perhaps misunderstood in the sense that you weren't trying to necessarily say that was an insulting term, because one of the points you were making is that instant mediocrity at scale can actually be pretty valuable, because that's way more than an individual human can do, right? And when I initially read your article, that rang true for me for a lot of Gen AI use cases that still do, in the sense that when I think about things like code generation or content generation, I do think of it a little bit like mediocrity on a certain level. Okay, the code may look great, but there's also security and quality control and everything else going back into that code and fixing it later. But on the other hand, there are some Gen AI capabilities that feel a little beyond the word mediocre. For example, the contract scrutiny you provide. I think one of the things Gen AI is especially good at is the kind of summarization of lengthy documents that it would, I think, probably get a grade a little above mediocre in my book in many cases. How has that post aged for you? And if you were writing it today, would you do the same post, or would you make some changes?
I think the biggest change that I've seen from a generative AI perspective is that we are getting better at creating targeted agents and specific prompts to get work done more consistently. We're starting to understand how to shape that language and to provide enough context to get
Yep.
to a useful outcome. We are better at understanding, still not there, but better at understanding that generative AI is not factual in nature, but is there to provide the vibes, the feeling of how a question should be answered based on the audience or the data that you are basing that answer on. So we have a better idea of understanding that, say, the generative AI doesn't care that Washington, D.C. is the capital of the United States. What it cares about is what is considered the capital of the United States by the data that it's looking at. And if that happens to be Washington, D.C., great, we're in alignment. If not, generative AI is just going to say, Dallas is the capital of, the United States. It doesn't care. It's just looking for whatever the data thinks that it's looking at thinks is correct. So there's that. And then I think there's a third point around generative AI still being challenged to handle multi-stage processes because it forgets what it's doing while it's going. I am very sympathetic to that. I do that myself when I'm working. So, generative AI and I have something in common there. But, it loses its track of thought halfway through, which leads to things like the traumatic Gemini response that you shared earlier in the show, where it just lost its head and just ended up giving this rando answer. And that's definitely a threat for generative AI when you're doing something that is step by step by step by step. Sometimes it just loses the track entirely.
Yeah. So would you say you stand by the instant mediocrity phrase as a description then?
I think instant mediocrity, if you're doing trying to conduct one specific task, but we're seeing that with a chain of tasks, there can be issues. And we're seeing some areas where it is either better than or worse than average. It is worse than average at factual recall. It is better than average at summarizing existing bodies of content.
So as I've kind of been bearing down on this, I'm going to publish again shortly on some cool examples of getting, like, with smaller models that are fit for purpose that perform a lot better than the so-called Gemini example. So there's some interesting stuff. And there's also some interesting non-Gen AI folks doing stuff in labs that I think are worthy of amplification. I just wrote about active inference AI and some of the interesting stuff going on there. But when I think about the enterprise, I think about, sometimes I get cynical because I feel like the reason Gen AI is being embraced so heavily is because of existing shortcomings in lack of automation that should have already been done already, and also poor user interfaces getting bailed out by a more interactive vibe, as you said, but perhaps at an expense of that user interface not really being as reliable as you might want. But one thing I do think is super interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of in the next year, is sort of a combination of unstructured and structured data into new business processes. Because the one strength that I've really seen in Gen AI is that ability to work with unstructured data. And then you look at developments around knowledge graphs and better use of structured data alongside that from more tabular formats inside of transactional systems. I think those building blocks are interesting. I haven't seen a really good example of that yet, but I think that's super interesting because there's so much potent unstructured data in the enterprise that really doesn't get taken into account when decisions are made and when we're interacting with our stakeholder groups. And I think that's interesting, but I haven't really seen a lot yet. I don't know.
I feel like every year gets hyped up to be the year of the knowledge graph, and we never
get there, do we? Yeah.
We
don't.
To quote John, I think how you just said the trenchant comment of the podcast. That's John's word, by the way. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah. Very trenchant. Yeah. And interaction is definitely not engagement. That is not always the same thing. So yeah, well, that's interesting. I'll look forward at some point to part 2 of that post, because I think you framed like that era of Gen AI very well, and I suspect we're moving into kind of a new era that could use a little reframing of that.
Yeah, one of the things I'm really interested in seeing is Mark Benioff said basically at Dreamforce he wants to see 1 billion agents by next year. which the agents are not hard to build in Salesforce. And of course, other platforms are going to have their own agents as well. So I wouldn't doubt that we have, call it, at least many millions of agents out there next year. And, as that happens, what happens to enterprises once you have thousands of agents that have been user built? Like, what happens to that layer? Because I think of this from an IT perspective, having to orchestrate all of that and figure out, deduplicate, perhaps in some instances, figure out which ones are most optimal to do an actual task. And I don't feel like that middleware-ish and management layer is fully baked in the agent level. I mean, all this is new anyways, but that's going to be like a next big headache, I think, for IT people.
I don't disagree, but I would think one of the bigger problems with getting to the whatever billion of those things is a lack of imagination. I'm not sure that enough people are really putting some serious brain power into thinking through the better ways of doing some work, and they're not incorporating that. We need to go back to the drawing board and radically rethink how we want to get work done. John, I know we got to be careful about the time.
I think we need to wrap the show in a few minutes. Hyoun, we could probably talk with you for another hour, but thanks for dropping the knowledge with us today. That was excellent. Much appreciated.
Always my pleasure.
And you're doing a pretty regular show as well, right? So folks can catch you on a fairly regular basis.
Yeah, I do a weekly show with my friend Charlie Araujo called This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's up on YouTube. Just look up This Week in Enterprise Tech and it should be there.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Catch you later.
Appreciate it. Good seeing you.
All right.
We may have a slide or two left, but before we go to that one, I just got to say, I can't believe you retired the Woody Guthrie baseball cap.
It's coming back, man. The Woody Guthrie will be back. Okay. It's a story not fit for discussion on this episode, but I'll tell you later.
Okay.
Cherie says, FinOps for Salesforce agents. Yeah, indeed. We're gonna need a real cost benefit analysis of that. We got our humorous whiff of the month, don't we? Pregnancy tracking app refuses to fix issue that allows full account takeover.
That's what you want when you want to have an app that respects some of your most private and personal information. You want it taken over. I mean, don't you? Anyway.
My cynical comment, hey, at least baby will know what to expect from cybersecurity from a young age.
I put this one in here. Meta fires a guy pulling down $400,000 a year because he used the meal voucher they get for working overtime to buy toothpaste.
Careful with those expense vouchers, folks.
Oh,
you might get yourself right-sized.
That they were trying to make some kind of important point there or whatever, but they weren't really. I'm not sure I agree with quite the tenor of what Meta did there, but they were trying to prove a point that we gave you the meal deal for food, not for toothpaste. Although, I guess if you really wanted to keep your job, you could argue to the Department of Labor that toothpaste is edible at some level. But anyway.
Inc. says it was a smart move, so I'll have to read the article and see what was smart about that. But I guess that's for another time. Something that inspires and creates value. Whoa, Brian.
Well, I think
talk about pulling the rug out from under me, man.
I think that's going to be the. I think that's going to be the unpredictions that are going to be coming out here any day now.
Yeah.
And I've already sent John a handsome 4-page listing of all kinds of interesting content for that. Yeah.
Hyoun says toothpaste is a food like ketchup is a vegetable.
Absolutely.
Fair enough.
Not
to mention, I think Meta forced everyone back to the office too. So it's like if someone's spending money on toothpaste, it means they're working like 12-hour shifts and stuff. So,
if I were that person's coworker, I want somebody with fresh minty breath, not something that smells like cigarettes and coffee and everything else is probably
So
getting
so Brent
consumed.
says edible toothpaste. It's come to this. I don't know if it's like we should. I think I'm going to choose to take pride that our show can devolve into that by the end. By the way, folks, Brent usually has a show kicking off around this time. So if you want a little more banter, check out Brent and his buddy shortly. I'm pretty sure you're going on, Brent. If you're not, if your show's canceled, let us know. But I'm pretty sure you're about to go on. So, Brian, yeah. So the unpredictions, yeah, everyone probably knows we issue those every year. They are still in the oven. So if you have any buzzwords you'd like to contribute to our buzzword generation for next year, let us know.
If you can,
I hope it inspires. I'm not sure if it's going to create value. I think that's a we'll see.
well, having a humorous moment does create value for a human being.
Okay, all
It's
right.
one of the emotions. Let's go with it. All right. Well, anyway, it was a great show. Yep, Brent's coming up. Good.
Yep. Let's segue right on over into Brent's show. Just go to his profile if you're on LinkedIn and fire that up because those guys are always a hoot on Fridays. And
Well,
Brent,
I
I
like to
might
go there
go
and
and discuss toothpaste with you.
I was going to say, I love to go on their show and just send in all kinds of little snark bombs on the comment stream. My whole goal in his show is to see if I can make Brent break character and start laughing, and the audience has no idea why. But anyway, all right, John, it was a
Well, I don't know if
good
are we going to do
podcast.
another show this year. I'm not sure. We'll have to decide that later. So either we'll do another show towards the end of this year, or we'll do a kickoff in January. We'll let you know. But thanks all for your salty comments in the chat as well, and
Yeah,
hope you enjoyed.
nice collection of comments. Thanks everybody for being on there. And if I'm sure we're not going to have a chance to say it any other time, but thanks. Have a happy Thanksgiving if you're celebrating that in your household.
Thanks for joining. All catch you later.